Welcome to JA Economics for Success, Paying for My Wants and Needs. For this lesson, you will need the following materials, including your volunteer guidebook, your student name tense, the student worksheet, as well as access to the digital platform found at learn.ja.org. You can work with your classroom teacher to determine whether you or the teacher will be responsible for pulling up the digital presentation each time you visit the classroom. We recommend asking the teacher to have the presentation ready, if possible, when you come into the classroom. If you're working a JA in a day or JA in the AM event, please know that JA staff has actively reached out and asked the teachers to have the presentation pulled up for you when you enter the classroom on the day of your event, if possible. To aid in preparation and facilitation, you'll see in your guidebook blue text boxes, which contain JA of South Dakota session-specific teaching tips, and yellow text boxes that include vocabulary terms and presentation content that's not already in your guidebook. When you go into the classroom, please greet the students and tell them a bit about yourself and why you chose to volunteer in their classroom if this is your first visit with the students. If this is not your first lesson with the students, please redistribute their table tents as needed and remind them of what they learned in the previous session. The next slide in this slideshow outlines the objectives for the lesson. Please read through these with the students and as they emphasize what students should know or be able to do by the end of the lesson. The slide suggests handing out the worksheet. Your worksheet is titled Ways to Pay. You may choose to do so now or later, as the worksheet will be used later on in the lesson. From here, as we move forward, the next slide showcases a few questions to prompt students to consider the ways in which people pay for things that they need and they want. This lesson will be going over many types of payment forms that can be used to buy needs and wants. Ask students to share how they purchase the items that they want. Do they pay with cash? Do they pay with check? Or do they pay a different way? Ask them how their parents or maybe their older siblings pay for things and call on some students to share. As you advance through the slides, please notice that many of the slides, especially the vocabulary slides, are interactive. You can choose to have a student come up to the board to click and reveal the definition of each word. Each of the words are buttons, and when you click them, the definition appears. Or you can have students guess the definition of the word, so you can introduce the concept, and before you reveal the definition, you could have students think about what they believe the word means, and then share it with a shoulder partner before sharing with the class and revealing the definition of the word. Next, you will introduce the concept of credit and debit as payment types. There are two options for implementing this slide. Again, you could call up the students for the next slide. You're going to introduce this concept and move on to the next slide, which is interactive. This is a click and drag activity. You have two options for using this in the classroom. The first is simply just to introduce the activity as we're going to call up one student at a time to come and click and drag one of the payment methods found at the bottom of the screen to the correct location. So is it using your money debit or the bank's money credit? And students can come up and select and click and drag. So the key here with students, if you're using a smartboard, is that they have to click on, like let's say we're using cash, they have to click and hold and then drag across the screen to get the money to where it needs to go. If it's correct, it will stay. If it was incorrect, it will pop down to the bottom. Please just note that the order that these are in on the bottom is pretty similar to where they should be going on the screen. So I suggest picking and choosing at random. So let's call up a kid for a gift to click and drag the gift card to the correct place. And then I'm going to want to pick something that's maybe the loan, or I want to go out of order, so it's just not obvious for the students. The other way you can implement this slide is that you can make this a movement activity. And what I would do is I would have all the students stand up and stand in the middle of the classroom. And I would designate one side of the classroom to represent your money or debit. And the other side of the classroom would be the bank's money and credit. And then I would, at random, pick a word from the bottom, let's say credit card. And I would say, okay, credit card. and I'd give students about 3 seconds to 5 seconds to move to either the debit side of the room or the credit side of the room. And then once they have, if everyone's on the credit side, I would click and drag this to the credit side. Great, we're correct. And then I'd have students go back to the center of the classroom before doing the next one. Let's say it is a check. And I say, okay, check. And maybe I have students who are unsure, or I have a class that maybe is split in half. That's a really good time to talk about any misconceptions and maybe ask students why they're standing on the side that they are, just so you can kind of clarify with students which payment methods are debit and which ones are credit before you move on to the next slide. Now, at the end, this one does have you submit your answers. So if you have time and you've done all the answers and they're all clicked and dragged to the correct sides, great, hit submit. If you don't have time or you need to move on before you're ready, another option is to use the menu at the top left-hand side. It is the 3 lines up here, and I'm going to click on that. And if I just need to move to the next slide, I'm going to go ahead and see where I'm currently at. You can see it highlighted. And I'm going to click on the next one just to be able to move forward. If you need to do so, you can do that at any time in the presentation. Now, this slide is technically usually blank the first time you come to it, so just know that. But this, if you have not handed out the student worksheet, this is the part where you want to do so. Students will be taking notes on the pros and cons of both debit payments and credit card payments on the next slide. I have a few recommendations for this one. Please know that these students are working on developing their note-taking skills. This will take them a little bit more time to write down. So what I suggest you do is, as you click through, to reveal each type of debit payment method, and you can go in any order that suits you. Let's say I'm going to click on gift card first. Please know that you can click on the image and it's going to slowly reveal bullet points for the pros and the cons. As you read these through with students, and I do recommend highlighting each of these as it will be used in a later game, but just require the students to write down one of the bullet points or to paraphrase on their note sheet, because we still want them to practice taking notes, but just know that this much text for each of the payment methods might just overwhelm students, or it might just take forever. So please just ask students to pick one of the facts. It doesn't matter which one. So maybe for the pros, we're gonna say cannot spend more than, and for the cons, maybe I'm just gonna say is not accepted for online sometimes. So just know that you don't have to have the students write everything because they will be taking quite a few notes. So on the front of the worksheet is where they'll find the debit payment methods and they'll take their notes. And then once you go to the next slide, it is credit payment methods. Students can flip over their sheet and they're going to follow the same pattern for the credit payment methods. So just know to go a little faster, just have them write down the one. And if they need help or if they need more time, just be paying attention and make sure that you know that you're not moving too fast for the students so they don't get frustrated. All right, so up next is the How Do You Pay game. Begin by splitting your class into 3 groups. There are going to be 15 questions for this game, so each group gets the opportunity to try to answer 5 questions. While students move to sit by their group, I would encourage them to bring their worksheet with their notes because they can use those. And then I would also encourage them to pick a team name. Sometimes that really helps students get invested in the game, and write their names, the team names up on the board or on the whiteboard or anywhere you have a chance to. And then you'll be able to keep score as you go through the game. I just do 1 point per question that they get correct. Now, when you call up students, so the way this works is that taking turns, have the first group designate a student to come up to the board and read the answer for the first question. The student can consult their team and their notes before answering if needed. So that's why the students have the notes with them. From there, you'll just rotate groups, all of them sending up a different group member each time. We try to give students as many turns as they possibly can, but don't make sure it's not the same kid coming up every single time. And then we just keep track of the score on the board. If you would like, and if the students have a tiebreaker at the end of the 15 questions, you can ask a question of your own, and the first kid to answer it is deemed the winning team. It can be a question from earlier on in the lesson, and it could also just be a general question or a team question or anything that you would like, as long as it's school appropriate. From here, I would have the students return to their original seats, and you're going to go to the next portion of the lesson. From here, and I'm just going to go ahead and skip through this game. Again, I'm using the menu bar at the top left-hand side to move on. And we're going to talk about Ivy's spending decisions, and this is just another chance to talk to kids about responsible spending. They get to discuss whether or not she, based on the scenario that you would read out loud, did she make a good decision? Did she not? Maybe what you would have done instead. Before moving on to the concept of overdraft. And if you have any experience with overdrafts or overdraft fees, or know what your personal fee is if you overdraft on, let's say, your checking account, you feel free to share that with students here. And then from here, we're going to kind of move on to hidden cost. And this one is really important to emphasize with students, because sometimes the idea of a nice shiny credit card where you can spend somebody else's money seems really appealing, but just let them know that there is such a thing as interest. And the next few slides will kind of emphasize that point. If you happen to know the interest amount or the interest percentage on your personal credit card or a loan, feel free to share those with students if you're comfortable, just to kind of give them a real life snapshot of what is realistic for interest. From here, we're going to go through Terrell's spending decisions. And again, this has to do with interest. We are not so concerned that the students know how to do the math in 6th or 7th grade or 8th grade, or whatever grade you're doing this in. Students probably have a rudimentary idea of how to calculate interest, but you might need to help them. Again, the math is not the most important part. The understanding of interest and the impact of interest is the important part. I do want to just emphasize, again, you can click the button for revealing your answer, but on question 3, which is the last question for Terrell's spending decisions, I just want to show you that the math is correct up top, but the answer is wrong. It should simply be $1,239. There shouldn't be any cents needed on that one. So just note that that is incorrect, because students might point that out to you as well. And then you will discuss his spending decisions and kind of get the students to understand that, you know, sometimes borrowing on credit is okay, but we need to make sure we pay it off so we don't accrue a bunch of interest, or just be aware of the interest before you purchase something. And again, once again, we're reiterating that you are usually going to be spending more when you spend with a credit card. So just should exercise caution when doing so. And then from here, we're going to wrap up. We're going to review our big ideas from the lesson, and we'll finalize our lesson with our reflection questions. Again, if you're running short on time, it is perfectly okay just to pick one of these topics to discuss with students if time allows. And then from here, if this is part of your JA in a day or JA in the AM program, please continue to the next lesson if it's applicable. Consider allowing students a quick stretch break while you get the next lesson pulled up and ready to go. If this is your only lesson of the day and you have more to teach at a later date, please make sure to collect the student name tents, as they will be reused for the next lesson. And with that, that brings us to the end of this session, paying for my needs and wants.